The growing confrontation between Israel and Iran especially carries serious economic consequences for India, particularly in terms of energy, security and trade costs. India depends on the Persian Gulf for over 80% of its crude oil imports, with significant volumes passing through the Strait of Hormuz in Iran. Any military escalation or blockade in this zone could disrupt the oil flow, pushing global prices up and directly affecting India's import bill. The uncertainty also complicates India's trade links with both nations. Bilateral trade with Israel stood at $10.1 billion in 2023, with defense, technology and agriculture forming core sectors. On the other hand, trade with Iran has declined due to US sanctions, but still remains important for strategic items like dry fruits, fertilizers and urea. With further instability, access to these imports could shrink or become more expensive. Moreover, the international north-south transport corridor, which connects India to Russia, Central Asia via Iran, faces delays due to fears around security and sanctions, undermining India's plan to reduce reliance on China-backed trade routes. The growing conflict between Iran and Israel is also affecting India's basmati rice trade, especially for exporters in Punjab and Haryana. Iran is one of the biggest buyers of Indian basmati, having purchased over 8.55 lakh metric tons in 2024-25, worth nearly 6,374 crore rupees. In strong trade years, Iran has made up to 30 to 35% of basmati exports from India. India's financial markets are not immune either. Increased volatility in West Asia often triggers a risk-off sentiment among investors. A prolonged conflict could pressure the Reserve Bank of India to intervene in the forex market and reconsider its inflation projections. On June 13, the BSE Sensex dropped by around 1,300 points, while the Nifty 50 fell below the 24,500 mark, following news of Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Earlier in the week, the Sensex had already fallen by over 800 points, with major losses seen in companies like L&T, Infosys and ICICI Bank as investors reacted to concerns about rising tensions and costlier crude oil imports. Although markets have started to recover, the episode highlights how India's stock market and inflation outlook remains highly sensitive to geopolitical instability in West Asia. Markets and exports aside, this war would be a direct hit on India's long-term investment in the Chabahar port. Located on the Gulf of Oman, this port is central to India's larger connectivity vision, including the international north-south transport corridor. With Israel's growing intelligence operations across the region and Iran's heightened readiness for retaliation, this port lies in a zone increasingly vulnerable to military escalations. Aside from these fears, one of the most understated but critical concerns emerging from this conflict is the potential disruption of undersea cable infrastructure. Submarine cables carry nearly 95% of global internet and data traffic and several high-capacity routes, including the Europe-India Gateway, which run through maritime corridors near Israel, Iran and conflict-prone zones like the Red Sea, Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz. Recent naval maneuvers by Israel near Haifa and increased Iranian presence near the Strait of Hormuz heightens the risk of deliberate or accidental damage to these cables. The danger is compounded by the cyber capabilities of both countries, with possibility of hybrid attacks on cyber landing stations no longer being hypothetical. With cable damage costing millions in economic loss per hour and affecting critical sectors such as banking and defense, the threat to this invisible infrastructure is no longer negligible. India stands particularly vulnerable in this scenario. Its booming digital economy, which contributes over $245 billion to the national GDP, relies heavily on these cables, especially those that land in Mumbai, Chennai and Kochi. In short, the Israel-Iran conflict isn't a distant regional issue. It has significant implications in India's economy, connectivity, trade and strategic autonomy.